This video is entitled Process Groups and goes along with Chapter 3 of the Process Management for Technology course. And I'm Jim Reneau, a Ph.D. from Shawnee State University, and I'll be taking you through this video lecture. In this presentation, we'll be covering the 5 main groups so that processes within a project go through, or the process you do when you're managing a project. The 5 process groups are initiating a project, planning of the project, executing the project, monitoring, controlling the project, and then finally closing the project. First thing, let's define what a process group is. A process group in some books, and I'll probably even do it, will refer to these groups as phases of a project. They're the 5 big processes or phases that each project goes through during its life cycle. Each phase has certain things that go along with each phase. Each phase has certain inputs that start the phase, that feed into the phase. The phase has processes that are done during the phase or the process. The tools and techniques, certain phases have certain tools and other phases use other tools and techniques. And finally, each process group will have specific outputs that feed into the next process group as we go through managing a project using this 5 process layout. The image above kind of shows the way the process groups fall and flow from one end to another, but the arrows that come back from monitoring, controlling, back to executing, and from monitoring, controlling, and back to planning are there to remind us all that it's not a strictly waterfall method of where we go one to do, and go through the 5 processes and never go back and never ever have to loop back into a previous process. You know, we may find that while we're executing a process or while we're executing a project, we have to go back and maybe replan something, maybe because of a change order or because of a lack of planning. So we never want that to happen, but it does sometimes. So remember that we go from process group to process group, but it's not always waterfall, and that outputs from one process group become the inputs to the next process group. Let's look at the first process group, initiating. The output to the initiating process is a project charter, and we'll define a project charter in a subsequent video. After the project, with the project charter, we're also going to see a business case or metrics that we're going to use to decide and to show that the project is a good business decision. Net present value, payback periods, cost estimates, cash flow projections, and other things are going to be done during this initiating phase. Because if we understand what it's going to cost, then if we have a good business case, then the likelihood of the project being a success is much better. We're also going to need to create a high-level scope document as we start to initiate the process, as we start to initiate the project. The scope document defines what specifically is in or out of the project. There are certain things that maybe users want that we're not going to do in this project. There are certain kind of, wow, that would be nice, but we can't afford it. Well, those would be the outs. But we have a very specific list of things that are in the project. We've kind of drawn a fence, a box around the project at this point to say, this is what's in bounds, this is what's out of bounds of the project, a high-level scope document. We also need, as we initiate a project, to make a list of the big risk factors. What are some of the big risks involved in this project? Maybe there's some financial risks. Maybe there are regulatory risks. Maybe there's some marketing risks. Maybe there are some management risks. Maybe, I don't know what the risks are. And some of the risks may even be positive. We may have a currency risk because we're dealing with a foreign currency transfer as we execute the project. And the risk might be a positive risk because we might win in the currency transfer or we might lose. So there are all kinds of big risks, and we need to also identify all of those as we start to initiate the project. These are the outputs of the initiation stage, the initiation project group of the initiating group or phase. So planning. We've initiated the project. Now let's start doing the planning to make the project really work. We use the input from the initiating or input from controlling if we're looping back to planning because of a change order or because of a lack of proper planning and initiating. And we create our schedule. We actually, at this point, create a step-by-step schedule of what we're going to do and when we're going to do it. We create our work breakdown structure, and we'll talk about a work breakdown structure in the next video. We'll identify the resources we're going to need to make the project work. We're going to need to identify the risks in detail. Now that we've had in initiating an early look at the risks, we need to identify the detailed risks. We're going to, in the planning phase, create a communication plan. And how are we going to communicate with the stakeholders of the project throughout the execution of this project? We're going to also probably or should create a procurement plan, which is a document that defines how we're going to purchase the things we're going to purchase. What contracts are we going to execute with vendors, subcontractors, and other kinds of things. We should create a change management plan here in this planning phase, which describes what we're going to do when changes happen to our project. I've seen very few projects that happen without changes as we live through the life of the project. Maybe something was missed in initiating. Maybe the scope has changed because of business reasons, economic reasons, legal reasons, lots of other reasons. Change is just life. So a project will go through changes, and as part of the planning phase, we need to create a plan for how we handle changes or a change management plan. And lastly, during the planning phase, we need to identify a more formal and more complete budget by using our subject matter experts and several budgeting techniques to use the work breakdown structure, use the contracts we're going to create, the procurement plan, and all of the other plans, and create a good detailed budget for us to move forward with on our project. Now that we've initiated and planned, it's time to start executing, to start actually working on the project. We use the project management plan, we work with the team, we communicate, and all of these things, quality assurance, that's what the QA stands for, is what we're going to start doing. Working with our management plan, again, making sure that everything is working. The executing phase is when we actually create the deliverables. The deliverables are produced and verified according to the Heldman book on page 53. So we take the inputs from planning or the inputs from controlling that loop back as we control to actually do the project, to actually make the product or endeavor that the project is all about. The monitoring and controlling process group is kind of interesting because it happens at the same time as the executing process group. The monitoring controlling group is when we watch how the execution is going and we make changes to the schedule, we push things around a little, we control, we monitor. It just kind of makes sense that while the execution is happening, monitoring and controlling happens simultaneously. We watch and guide the project's progress. We maintain and watch the risks, both positive and negative risks. We look for issues. We measure performance and make sure that we're performing at the level we're expected to. And if we're not, we figure out why. And if we're doing better, we also figure out why. The monitoring and controlling process is where changes to the project are created and then looped back into the execution if they're approved based upon the change control process that we created earlier. And lastly, the monitoring and controlling phase of the project is where we're always keeping an eye on the budget to make sure that we're as close as possible to making this project within the bounds that we defined monetarily. The last process group, and one that is often forgotten and skipped or considered to be of less importance than the others, and it's not, it's just as important, is the closing group. The closing group is, or the closing process group is, remember, we're doing a project, and a project is a temporary endeavor, right? That was the definition of a project that we used at the beginning of the semester. So a temporary endeavor finishes sometime, and this is the time when we're done. Execution is done. We're done monitoring and controlling. We need to pass this project either to operations for daily use, or we need to pass it to its final consumer. We need to finalize and complete the training. We need to finalize the documentation. We need to figure out what lessons we've learned as we've executed and controlled. What things did we do right, and what things did we do wrong? And there will be plenty of those probably as we go through a project. We'll need to release the resources, the employees that have been given to us from the matrix style organization, from the projectized style management, from the hierarchical functional organization. So we need to release the resources. Maybe we need to release some physical resources, office space, manufacturing space, laboratory space, and lots of other things. We need to close all of the contracts with our suppliers, all of the contracts with our vendors, all have to be closed and finalized. And lastly, we need to have a sign-off of the project from our sponsor, from the person who signed off on the beginning documents to give us the money to do this. We need to have everyone sign off that the project is done. And this needs to be a very formal thing, and we'll talk about this in a subsequent presentation. Kim Heldman's Project Plus Study Guide, published by John Wiley and Sons, was used as a reference in this material. I would like to say thank you for watching this presentation. This presentation is copyright 2020 by James Reneau Ph.D. All rights are reserved. This work is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial Share-alike 4.0 International License. And again, I'd like to say thank you for watching.